Welcome to Data Science Perspectives. This series focuses on analytics and data science professionals from across industry to learn about how their career unfolded, what skills they look for when hiring, and what trends they think are coming next. I'm your host, Bill Franks. Let's get to it. Welcome to this episode of Data Science Perspectives. I'm your host, Bill Franks. Today we're going to welcome Amelia Mink. Amelia and I first met probably close to 10 years ago when she was running what was then Data Science Atlanta. And she's been extremely active in the Atlanta marketplace, helping raise awareness for data science and getting the community engaged for the past several years. In fact, her organizations were initially focused more regionally, but then she started to focus more broadly, and COVID actually helped her complete the pivot to where now she has an international focus. She actually began her career as a data scientist at Northside Hospital, a large conglomerate here in Atlanta, and then moved on to PSA Healthcare, which provided services to sick children at home as well as sick homebound adults. She then went to Juice Analytics, a startup company, and helped them build various reporting and dashboards aimed at the healthcare industry before deciding to take the leap to run Data Science Connect full-time in 2017. So before that full-time leave, she'd been doing all of her work with the community on the side. She took that leap in 2017, and she's been doing it ever since. She's got a bachelor's in business management and entrepreneurship from Georgia Tech and a master's in data science from Northwestern University. And with that, let's welcome Amelia to the show. Well, thanks for joining me on the show today, Amelia.
Thanks for having me, Bill. I'm excited to be here.
So one thing with you, I know everyone starts out different, but you initially got a bachelor's in business from Georgia Tech, granted, very STEM heavy school, but more of a business degree. And then you've ended up in data science. So why don't you tell a little bit about the journey of how you first got over into data science?
So this one's a great question, and one I get a lot, actually. Even my own mother was like, you went to an engineering school and finished with a business degree? I was like, well, that was kind of hurtful, but I started at Georgia Tech, actually. I grew up my entire life being really good at math and science. And so at that point in time, if you were really good at math and science, sort of the traditional route would be you went to med school and you became a doctor. And so when I got into Georgia Tech, I went in pre-med, and I was actually a biology major. So I was actually a biology major for almost 4 years, if you can believe that. And I hated lab. I hated the sterile nature of it. I hated the precision of it, even to an extent, and loved my math classes. But lab was really I had a lot of internal conflict around the lab environment. And it got to the point where I was getting close to graduating and studying for the MCAT, and realized that for whatever reason, if I didn't go to med school or didn't get into a med school, I was probably going to spend my life in a laboratory. And so I did a lot of quick soul searching, and very quickly it was, I guess, the two sort of general routes at Georgia Tech would have been industrial engineering or business management. And I was already into my fourth year of college, and so I had to make a move quickly. So I switched to business and did the maximum credit hours each semester. And I'm actually really glad I made that decision. A lot of the principles I learned in the business school at Tech have applied into kind of carried over into what I'm doing now. But that's sort of what happened there. And then I, after college, I was still kind of soul searching and trying to put that healthcare thing to bed, and reached out to a good friend of mine who's a well-known endocrinologist in Atlanta. And at the time, it was a really large multi-specialty medical practice called Laureate Medical Group, which was kind of at the time undergoing a merger with Northside Hospital. And so she said, let's get you in the door. We'll have you shadow a physician. We'll have you shadow the CEO, and we'll kind of figure out what makes sense and maybe put this med school thing to bed, or you can move forward with your plans to go to med school. And so I shadowed kind of both personas and really found myself gravitating to the business side of healthcare. And so I got my foot in the door. I told the CEO I'd do whatever she needed me to do, and just kind of became an extension of her. And she was incredibly data driven, and a lot of her her approach and strategy to managing the medical practice was data driven and performance metrics across all arms, primarily financial, operational, but also clinical. And so she was doing a lot of cutting edge kind of spreadsheet work on her kind of on the back end. And so I found myself really gravitating to the data related projects and pretty quickly wrote my own job description and said, I remember doing a lot of research on what it should be called, but I said, I'm going to be a performance analyst, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I've been doing. This is what it's going to be called. And if you look up performance analyst now, that's actually like a really common job title at Northside Hospital and in healthcare now. And I don't know if it's not a coincidence from Northside Hospital, but maybe it is in general. But so from there, I started, I kind of realized I needed more tools and started taking a Coursera course on graph theory and also researching graduate programs. And that's around 2011 probably. And I remember around that time, talking to my uncle about sort of what I was going to do with my life. And I told him what I loved and what I felt like I was good at and also enjoyed. And he was like, you should be an actuary. And so I looked it up and I was like, no, this sounds really boring. But I was reflecting on that actually kind of recently. And I was like, he was kind of right. Like that's the closest anyone could have gotten to sort of predicting data scientist. So that's sort of how I circuitously got into this field.
It's interesting then, because this ties a thread together for me. Your early jobs were in the healthcare space, like with Northside Hospital, which for those who aren't local, it's a massive hospital conglomerate here in the Atlanta area. So I guess you had the biology background, the medical interest at some point, and so you get into doing the analytics, but at least you were in that familiar environment. Is that kind of how you ended up there, I'm assuming?
Absolutely. And it carried over into, then I but I started working at a really large pediatric healthcare company that does home healthcare for like medically fragile kids, and was doing a lot of like financial forecasting, financial modeling, it was very financial centric or finance centric, but it was also, we were doing a lot of work with clinical metrics and that sort of thing as well. And then from there, I joined a smaller data visualization startup called Juicy Analytics out of Nashville and Virginia and Atlanta, and started kind of building and developing and designing healthcare dashboards for them. And that kind of tapped into a skill set that I didn't really know was there too, but I really enjoyed building dashboards.
Well, I know when you were working, you started what was then Data Science Atlanta, and that's when I first met you. Was as you were kind of putting together. I think they started just more as a meetup, and you eventually worked your way into events and such. So, what led you to start that, and then how did you balance your day jobs with it? Because I know from events, on a corporate side and such, there's always so much more effort that goes into even what appears to be a small event than people know. And it's not like you could just show up. So what made you to start it, and how did you manage to balance that for those first years?
That's a really good question. Starting an event organization was definitely never in my plans. And so what actually happened is when I was back at Northside Hospital, I decided I was going to start this healthcare dashboard app organization, or I was going to build an app and do a startup. And I asked around, and someone said, you need to take someone named Raj Bandyopadhyay to lunch, and he will maybe help validate this product. And at the time, it was this brand new concept of having a reporting dashboard on healthcare analytics. And so I took him to lunch over in Tech Square, and I remember kind of pitching him the product. And he said, well, actually, I'm starting a meetup group right now called Data Science ATL. We actually have a meetup, I think it was that week, you should come. And so I was like, okay. And so I went to the meetup group, and it was maybe the most aha moment I think I've ever had in my life. We were all there with different kind of backgrounds and kind of walks of life, but I felt like I kind of found my really nerdy tribe. And I just remember it all made sense in that moment. I was like, this is where I'm supposed to be in data science. And it was a was at the time it was like a group of like 20 really nerdy, like highly technical practitioners. I actually joke, my girlfriends used to say like what are you doing tonight? I'd say I'm going to a data scientist meetup, and they'd be like, what is a data scientist meetup? And I was like, no, it's not data scientist. I mean, at the time it might have been, because it was almost primarily male, but I knew data science had gotten traction once I stopped getting that question of what a data scientist event would be. And so we started out as a group of like 20, and we're focusing on really highly technical content. And very quickly it grew to 200 and 400 and then 4,000. And kind of over time, I really stepped up as an organizer and as a founding member. And over time, took over as the kind of the primary organizer of this group. So that's how that happened. That's how I became an event planner.
And I think I'm trying to think. I was the first time I did a talk for you all. Was it the one down at Georgia Tech in the big auditorium around 2016? I remember that because that was when data science was becoming a big thing. And I got to be honest with you, I think I had attended one event prior to that at some point, and I knew that you all had a decent following. And I said, sure, I'll come down and give a talk. And I was blown away because if I recall that, you really filled that auditorium at least halfway, and it was a big auditorium. I remember saying, this is amazing that there's this much interest in the Atlanta market for data science, right? Even me being in it for years, that was a moment for me. I'm like, wow, this is really big that we're able to get this many people to come out.
I think you drew 300 people at least to that auditorium. And so worth mentioning, you were the DSATL all-time favorite. So you were famous in the community and are famous in the community, and you brought a big draw. That was a very exciting night for everyone. And I actually still remember that talk. You gave a talk on monetizing location data, and I went back and watched it multiple times. It was so cool, and something I would reference a lot in conversation.
What's interesting, if you talk about, 300 people there and growing, you already said you started with 20 nerds. And by the way, you said people ask, what's a data scientist? If it's a scientist, I would describe that event as something probably very sparsely attended. But anyway, getting the momentum. So I know obviously you had a little bit of help with the tailwinds of data science was getting big, but there's still, had to be a challenge in figuring out how do you get the word out? How do you get people to tell their friends? And most importantly, to actually show up, right? Because I know it's really easy to have people say, oh, I'd love to come to something like that. But to have them actually drive what could be back then in traffic an hour to show up is a whole different thing. So how did you go about that kind of demand generation and the excitement of showing up versus thinking about it?
So drawing an audience was actually something that we just always did really well, and it happened very organically. And I think that was based around the fact that our speakers were always, of course, like top tier, and the content was always very vendor neutral. And we tried to, my rule of thumb for sort of what type of sort of topic we were presenting in a given month would be if it was like right over my head. Like I knew that's like right where where the subject matter needed to be. And that's the people sort of followed. Worth mentioning some growing pains we did experience once DSATL really turned into a full-time gig, kind of under the umbrella of Data Science Connect. What was harder was sort of monetizing it and figuring out how to make a business of it, and we had this really organic community and just this synergy and this growth that was really unprecedented, but making money off of that and convincing partners and sponsors to fund that was sort of a different story.
So that's interesting thing I'd like to dig into a little bit, which is you've hinted at it, where you started as data science Atlanta, and then I recall you had some offshoots like data science North Carolina. There was almost a strategy of let's get a variety of localized groups, but then you morphed and pivoted into Data Science Connect, which wasn't just a rebranding by name, but then effectively did take out that geographical component, and intentionally so. So what What led you to do that? What was the rationale behind Data Science Connect, and did it end up going the way you had planned initially, or have you ended up, as often happens, pivoting even more since you pivoted?
So what happened was around 2017, Data Science ATL had just experienced this massive growth. We were starting to get attention from a lot bigger sponsors. I remember Click came in and offered us money we had never seen before, because prior to, in our earlier days, Data Science ATL sort of consisted of grabbing pizza on the way there. I remember in our more sophisticated days, I would also grab like a $10 giant bottle of wine and make sangria. But we would grab pizza, we would find a free venue, and tons of people would show up. And it got to the point where we were having trouble finding venues to accommodate our audience. And it was around 2017 where I think Click came in, the data viz platform came in and pretty generously funded a meetup, and we had tons of people there, and the wheels just started spinning, and I it was kind of keeping me up at night that what we were doing was just so much more worthy of kind of an evening weekend passion project. And so I took a leap of faith. It was on a Friday, I remember, and decided that I was going to start, or I was going to do what we had been doing for years, but on a much larger scale, and I was going to do it full time. And that was really scary. But we decided to call it Data Science Connect. And that did start out with an Atlanta focus and also grew very quickly. And so we did our first conference, I think, within a few months. And from there, I think we started, the plan was to kind of start growing regionally. And so I remember you spoke at our Raleigh conference. We had a giant Raleigh conference. We were doing stuff in Nashville, and we were talking about doing things. We had planned a conference in Greenville, and actually we had booked the venue on Peachtree. I can't remember what it's called. That's bad. But we had booked a giant venue for like 1,000 people, and it was a theater, the Buckhead Theater.
Oh,
And then COVID happened. And so my world kind of came crumbling down, and I realized very quickly I needed to pivot. And so I started with sort of a series of virtual events called Virtual Thursdays. And each week, I think it was each week we focused on, or every few weeks we focused on an industry specific application of data science, and had a really great panel. And so we did the sharing economy, automotive analytics, supply chain and manufacturing, healthcare. I think we did one focused on COVID and the impact of analytics and data science there. And I think at our first virtual event, we had folks from over 60 countries present. And that was sort of a point of no return. That's when I realized we had really hit on something, and there was something really special here in the virtual space that is just impossible to do in the in-person space. And that is sort of how Data Science Connect became a global company, and now one of the largest, if not the largest, data science community in the world. And so once again, it happened very organically. And the virtual landscape, a lot of people are like, aren't you so ready to return to in-person events? And I'm like, heck no. Like, the virtual landscape has been so special and is so unique in the sense that we can bring together. We have 10,000 people registered for our October conference from all over the world, and we have the best speakers from all over the world coming together, and we're connecting all of these kind of niche interest groups and being able to highlight things in a format just surrounding something as specific as feature engineering or graph analytics. And everyone from all over the world that's interested in graph analytics or feature engineering or whatever kind of this specific topic is can come together and share on that. And so the virtual landscape has really allowed us to really capitalize on our mission, which is making data science accessible to all. And we plan to incorporate in-person conferences soon as well, but we plan to always be in the virtual landscape, and always plan on kind of connecting the data science community globally.
So one thing you do as well that I find intriguing, because you kind of have a couple of different shows or a couple of different flavors of events now, and one that I think is unique because I don't know anyone else who does it. You actually have one event that's aimed at the K to 12 audience, so the kids. And I found that fascinating when I saw you do it the first time, mainly because let's face it, most of the commercial event programs specifically would never target the kids, and it's like an entirely different animal. So, what made you decide to hit a K to 12 audience, and then what are the challenges in putting together an event for a K to 12 audience that I'm sure they're vastly different than doing something for the grown-ups in the room?
So this one is so crazy to me. I actually remember you reached out to me after our K-12 conference, which you spoke at, and you were like, that was really an incredible risk you took. Like, that's like, what a great job. And I'm just, K-12 data science just feels so, it feels like a no-brainer to me. And it just is so necessary in the data science landscape, because like the way data science worked and how it sort of became an industry in general is that, as you know, it's kind of started in industry and it backed its way into grad school and it backed its way into undergrad. And now it's slowly kind of trickling into high school curriculum, but only in kind of magnet schools and schools that are, or at least counties and kind of regions that are ahead of their time. And it's still so untapped in the K-12 landscape. And we're talking about a market that's predicted to be like $225 billion by 2025. And kids are still not, we're still not incorporating any type of foundational data science curriculum into what they're learning. And so putting together sort of a K-12 offshoot, we did the first, it's really hard to believe, we did the world's first K-12 data science conference and had like, I think 3,000 or 4,000 kids from all over the world come together and learn from, just including yourself, just the best thought leaders and just sort of the data science experts of the world, and to teach these kids all about data science for the K-12, or for the K through fourth graders. We focused on sort of foundational data science concepts, the behavior of data, patterns, data visualization, that sort of thing. For grades 5 through 8, we focused on more technical approaches like coding. I think they did like a how to code Minecraft workshop. It was, I think, even like foundational math and statistics that are sort of foundational to data science. And then for the high school kids, we really focused on career and what a day in the life of a data scientist would look like. I think that was the audience that you spoke to, yeah. What that looks like, how to prepare for a career in data science. And that was easily the coolest thing Data Science Connect has ever done. And it's honestly, we finished that conference and I was like, well, great. Now I have more questions than we came into this with. Like clearly there's a lot of work to be done here. What does that even look like? And we've got a lot of big plans. We're still kind of figuring out what that looks like, aside from just a giant annual conference where we teach these kids all about data science. But I would say that one of the challenges was just figuring out where to meet each sort of age group. And that's why we sort of kind of specifically kind of curated these sort of kind of foci groups, which would be for the K4, the 5 through 8, and the 9 through 12, to kind of be sort of in different phases of the data science life cycle. You're not going to try to teach a kindergartner how to code, and you're not going to, well, I guess arguably you could teach a high schooler about the behavior of data, that sort of thing. And also I would say it was just a very different audience. I remember logging in and the chat section was just going crazy. And I remember it was so different from what our traditional audience is like. And they were just typing, I love math. Math is so cool. And I didn't know really what to do with them. And one little guy was just typing just tons of letters. And so I put something, as kind of the moderator of the chat, I put something in the chat like, I think so-and-so has had too much coffee this morning. And he responded, I'm 7 years old. I was like, this is the, so that was another kind of, it was just a new, I don't know what I expected planning a K-12 conference, but it was
Yeah.
a completely new audience for us. But it's the best thing we've ever done. And I can't wait
I got to
to
tell you,
continue.
you've impressed me a couple times a day with the level of detail of your memory. Some of these very specific facts you've pulled out from the past. It's impressive. Like remembering even the specific track that you had me speak in 3 years ago on the thing. That's it's impressive. Speaking of the speakers, though, obviously as you have these multiple events, then how do you go about the challenge of you need enough speakers, but you need them to be good enough so that people will want to come back, but you also need some fresh content and so forth. Like, do you have a secret science behind doing that, or you just have a big enough show now that you have so many applications coming in that you're able to choose? Like, how much is recruiting versus filtering?
We do, we've been doing, because our kind of our speaker database and our speaker Rolodex has gotten so big, we do a decent amount of filtering now, but it's also important to continue to bring in fresh faces and new perspectives. That the kind of the speaker opportunity is kind of endless and just there are so many great speakers. And so the rule of thumb is just to find someone that's really great, and we just kind of set you guys free and let you talk about whatever you want to talk about. And that's kind of the funny part. When we recruit a really great speaker, they're like, all right, what would you like me to present on? And I'm like, whatever you want to present on. That's why we chose you. And so, like, knock on wood, we've gotten really lucky with just finding really great speakers and setting them free, and then the audience follows. And I would say, in terms of keeping things fresh, running a data science sort of conference organization and organizing a data science community has really allowed me to kind of see, it's been frustrating in some ways because I kind of miss that practitioner focused perspective, but I get to see kind of all these trends taking place from a higher level, kind of a bird's eye view. And that has, I think, kind of informed what the themes of our conferences are, what we focus on, the type of topics that sort of where we look for speakers. And so stuff is happening in the industry that a lot of people might not see yet, but it's been really easy to distill these kind of themes and patterns that are happening and kind of make sure that that's represented in our conference. In terms of one thing I really want to do a lot more of, I also just kind of, I say I'm not I didn't plan on being an event organizer, but I spend a decent amount of time kind of researching and kind of keeping an eye on just event organizations in general. There's actually this, I don't remember the name of them, but it's like a EDM event group, and they do tons of huge concerts, but I love their branding, and they always do some crazy theme. And so long term, I know we've had like candy bars at our conference, and we try to do something kind of fresh and unique, and we don't like hotel conferences, we do like theaters, but I'd like to spend more time making the event experience and the attendee experience more one of a kind. And as we grow and have more resources, I look forward to not only bringing fresh concepts to the attendee experience and to our content, but also kind of rethinking the experience in general and how we bring data science content to our audience. So that's where my head's at a lot too. And one place that I haven't, you wouldn't believe the stuff that's EDM event group does.
Well, I could tell you, I made myself sick to my stomach on more than one of your events because you used to have basically a candy store display of free candy, and I've never been able to resist that. So I get a bag filled with just a little bit of everything, but then it ends up being like a half pound of candy I'm eating.
And I handpicked all of that candy. It's very important.
It was a nice mix. And then I also appreciate your approach when you say you just let the speakers do what they want, because I found it can actually go the other way unintentionally, where someone will talk to me, hey, can you speak? I go, is there any specific topic? And I'm looking for like a general high level. And they'll start getting super specific. We'll talk about this and this and this and this and this. And I'll be like, okay, well, I got some good stuff on 4 of those 6 things, but these other 2. And after we go back, they'll go like, well, really, I just thought I needed to come with all of this for you to, but if you already have stuff, that's fine. And so it's kind of interesting. People feel obligated sometimes to come with a really big plan if they're asking. And I actually think it's better for people who do a lot of speaking. It's better if you're like, in this general area, I know you have some stuff, just, send us an abstract and we'll make sure it fits with the general program, but it'll be good, versus the people who feel like they have to come with it all laid out. Because that's actually harder. It's a lot harder for me. I have a lot of stuff, but if you tell me exactly that, there's always going to be something. Well, I'm sorry, I don't have an exact example on healthcare in Europe tied to, X, Y disease, right? There's a point where,
I guess I'm making a new presentation.
yeah.
So, and also to your point about just kind of allowing speakers to bring their own content and their own sort of just presentation and direction in general, what we're seeing get a lot of traction with our audience is even content and sessions that are not necessarily technical or even data science specific necessarily. It might be tailored towards the data science audience, but like what you're working on, winning the room,
Right.
giving good presentations, how to effectively present or build a presentation, how to communicate that with data. We have another workshop instructor who does one just on job crafting and on job satisfaction, and it really resonates with our audience. And so that's been kind of a neat sort of evolution of what type of content we include in our conferences, as well as sort of the professional development sort of aspect and even the personal development aspect. That type of experience and education pays dividends for companies and for individuals alone. And so that's kind of something relatively new in our sort of arsenal of sort of content that we provide. And people like you are to thank for that. You and Nahama from Pfizer and a couple other kind of VIP speakers that we have who have said, hey, I'm working on this. I wrote this book. Do you think your audience would be into it? And that has really gotten a lot of traction too.
So that could be a great note to end on, because I know I've taken a lot of your time, some good tips for folks in terms of how to think about their own speaking. I just want to thank you for your time and congratulate you again on the growth of your team. And thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Bill. It's been a great pleasure.